Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me congratulate you on your new position here and say I'm really looking forward to working with you to reinvigorate congressional oversight, which we've allowed to atrophy, quite honestly. So really want to work very cooperatively with you to do so. First chart I'm going to put up here describes and shows dramatically what bipartisan spending cooperation yields us. In 2019, prior to the pandemic, the federal government total spending was $4.4 trillion. During the pandemic, with the severe recession, trying to help Americans out of that, we went on a massive spending spree and spent $6.5 trillion that year. Now, in an American family, if let's say you spend $100,000 a year and you have a family member that gets sick and you have extraordinary expenses, maybe $50,000, you spend $150,000 that year. The following year, if you get well, you don't keep spending $150,000, and you certainly don't borrow money to do so. But the federal government, in effect, did the exact same things. For the last 5 years, we've averaged $6.5 trillion. Last year, we spent over $6.9 trillion. This is $2.1 trillion above 2019 levels. This is absurd. Mr. Vogt, do you see any rationale for continuing these spending levels?
No, Senator, and thank you for the question. And we're in a situation we have $36 trillion in debt. Our fiscal house continues to be a mess. When I left office, we were spending about $350 billion in interest per year, too much. And we're now in a situation where it has surpassed what we spend on defense. And we have to put forward budgets and spending plans. We have to consider them in Congress. The budget process needs to work again. And we've got to tackle this problem that you're clearly articulating.
Let's talk about how we reset spending to a reasonable level. Let me put in my next chart. Another family analogy. Let's say that same family makes $100,000 and they have a child. So their population grows 25%. So if their income grew from $100,000 to $125,000, and let's say throw on top of that 3% inflation. So now you're at $128,750 total income. That family's kept whole, right? Kind of no harm. They've been able to maintain their spending level with increased population and inflation. Well, again, I'm trying to figure out some way to justify a lower spending level. So I've gone back in time. I went back to Bill Clinton's administration, 1998, the first year we had a surplus since 1969. Back then, Bill Clinton spent $1.7 trillion. Last year, we spent $6.9 trillion. Now, if you take Bill Clinton's spending level, again, I don't think Bill Clinton spent too little, and you inflate the spending to increase it based on population growth and inflation, with this caveat, you slot in President Biden's spending on Social Security and Medicare and interest. You leave those as they are, but you inflate it. That $1.7 trillion would be $5.5 trillion of a baseline spending. Now, if that's too reasonable for you and you want to spend more money, you could look at President Obama's 2014 spending. Back then, he spent $3.5 trillion. Now, inflate his base spending, population and inflation, using Biden's Social Security, Medicare, and interest, you'd be spending $6.2 trillion. Those would be reasonable baselines, correct? Now, I also did it in 2019. I don't particularly like the result because we'd be at $6.5 trillion. That's not good enough. Let's go to our next chart. Here's the one, and I think you've got this in front of you, that I want to use because we have a new administration. President Trump, the tail of his administration, you were probably key in producing this budget, budgeted for 2025 a spending level of $5.4 trillion. So if you take that budget, inflate all the spending except for Social Security, Medicare, and interest, that is what we spent this year anyway, or projected to spend in 2025, the baseline budget would be $6 trillion. So my question to you is, having gone through this, I realize a lot of numbers, a little bit of a rationale here. Why wouldn't this be a very reasonable baseline spending as a starting point for the next 10 years?
Senator, I think it very well could be. I mean, I think we have to get into office if confirmed and look at the numbers, begin the formal budget development for the president's fiscal year 26 budget. Haven't begun to do that. But there's a clear template in terms of the previous budgets that the president has put forward. He put forward more spending cuts and reforms and savings than any president in history. It was largely ignored by Congress. Our hope is that the budgets that he puts forward, that there's more of a take-up rate here in Congress with regard to the spending cuts that are necessary to get us out of this hole.
Would you agree right now that this is the primary metric that we need to be focusing on, is how much in total the federal government spends? It's not, I'm hearing people saying, well, in order to sign on to a budget, I've got to see $3 to $5 trillion in cuts. Measured against what? And I will just point out, by the way, is in terms of metric, you start about a $6 trillion level when we're already spending $7 trillion. That's $1 trillion difference over 10 years. That's $10 trillion in reduced spending versus what the current Biden baseline is. I would also ask, do you think any American who voted for President Trump expected that spending levels would remain at Biden levels?
No, the president ran on the issue of fiscal accountability, dealing with our inflation situation. And to your earlier question, Senator, like any family in the country, the main metric with regard to whether your fiscal house is good or not is the extent to which you're spending and the way that drives your debt. And that's the metric, and that's the area that we'll be looking at to be able to bring it back into some rationality.
By the way, I didn't point it out on the previous chart there. I showed the Clinton level. If you inflate that to $5.5 trillion, just happens to match what President Biden is projecting for revenue. If we do this, we're that close to a balanced budget. So it's possible, and it's possible using Clinton spending priorities or even Obama spending priorities. I just soon use President Trump's. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think by now most people have seen this chart. It's become a lot more famous from when I started developing this as chairman of this committee back in 2015, different versions of it. This chart I gave to President Trump in April of 2024 that he liked, adopted, started using the campaign, and on July 13th, turned his head and saved his life. But so that's obviously the biggest benefit, the most important benefit of this chart. But prior to that, what I like most about this chart is it showed cause and effect. It showed the effect of different policies, different court decisions like the reinterpretation of the Flores decision. But in particular, it showed how effective the migrant protection program was, return to Mexico. And it's obvious. And Mr. Isaacson and Senator Peters, I can't believe that you're sitting here telling us that MPP, that remain in Mexico, didn't work. It obviously worked. This was a crisis for the Trump administration. By the way, crisis caused by deferred action on childhood arrivals. That's the catalyst that sparked all these crises since that was implemented in June 2012. So when President Trump faced his immigration crisis, he did something about it. He used the existing law. And it was a lie over the last 4 years that President Biden didn't have the executive authority to secure the border. He had it. He used that exact executive authority to open the border back up and cause this clear and present danger to America. Mr. Isaacson, you're talking about we're fueling, or I think this is actually ranking member said we're dumping fuel in the fire of the cartels. I mean, at this point, I think it's 570 encounters a day. I think the record was over 14,000 December 2000, whenever it was, 2023. When you have those migrants paying $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 to the cartel, I mean, do the math. 10,000 times versus $1,000 for the thousands that were in migrant protection. So we were protecting people by deterring them from trying to come to this country illegally. There's no doubt about it. And the cost, we have, I think the House subcommittee on this has determined the cost of taking care of this massive flow of illegal immigration is $150 billion a year. And again, have you not heard of the taunting trees, the panty trees, the rape trees during this time of the cartels just basically taunting CBP by putting the undergarments of the young girls that they rape, that they're also getting $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 for the trafficking. So there's absolutely no doubt the return or remain in Mexico problem worked, that the president has the authority to do so, to implement this and implement it again. I think it is important to note that one of the keys was the threat of tariffs against Mexico. We needed Mexico's cooperation here. You know, we implemented MPP, I think, in the summer of 2019, and we still saw numbers rise until President Trump called up the president of Mexico and said, we need your cooperation, you're going to get hit with tariffs, and you see the dramatic result. So, Ms. Cuccinelli, can you just talk again about what authority exists, to talk about really what a lie we've been told over the last 4 years that President Biden didn't have the authority. He obviously did. He used the same authority to open up the border and cause this catastrophe.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And the cartels have never been so flush with cash because of that open borders policy. I would point out, we look at the border from the north. And if you think about Mexico, in the northern part of Mexico, but not just the northern part of Mexico, the federal government of Mexico doesn't control Mexico. 1/6 of the country is controlled by the cartels. 1/6 is contested between the cartels and the government. And, you know, Mr. Isaacson says, you know, within 30 minutes of leaving MPP, the same thing happens over and over. Well, that can't happen if Mexico is actually policing the border, which they're not, and they're not able to do. So I would also add that a lot of the violence that occurred both between Mexicans and directed at illegal migrants in Mexico by the cartels over the years has been fairly widely reported in Mexico. There are reasons it isn't the cartels go after those journalists, but we don't see any of that reporting here. None of it. And it's brutal, it is vicious, and it has been fueled by the explosion in traffic in the last 4 years. The president has the tools to turn that traffic off. We saw, as you noted on the chart, that you can have an effect on the direction of the traffic and meaning the numbers. And I fully expect President Trump will do that. Remain in Mexico is just one tool. There are other tools as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Governor Nome, welcome, and thank you for your willingness to serve. You'll be taking over a massive federal government agency, 240,000 employees. It's probably too massive. I think had I been there back then, I don't think I would have assembled these 22 different agencies in this massive department, but that's what we've got. It's a department that the previous administration, I think, has completely misused. Instead of using Customs and Border Protection to do that, to protect our border and secure it, they've utilized those resources to incentivize a massive influx of illegal immigration. Instead of using the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency to do that, they instead engaged in mission creep and utilized it to censor Americans with the Misinformation Board. I am concerned about disaster relief, just federal disaster relief in general, creating greater and greater and increasing levels of moral hazard, resulting in higher costs of these disasters. So let's cover each one of those kind of in order. How do you gain control over a massive agency whose resources and personnel have been misused? I mean, how do you root out those individuals who, instead of securing our border, opened it up and facilitated this?
Well, Senator, this has been a big topic of conversation in most of the meetings that I've had with the members of this committee was how do we fix this agency, which the reputation is that it's broken and dysfunctional. I think that was the question I get asked the most is why would you want to head up such a dysfunctional department? And I would say that because the mission of the department is to secure the homeland and our people. It's our biggest vulnerability right now. And we have a president that's not enforcing the law. And I don't believe the law should be unequally applied. Everyone wants to be subject to our laws, and a nation without laws and without borders is not a nation at all. So I will work by ensuring one of the things that Senator Ernst talked about, people have to show up for work. I think there's going to be a majority of people who don't have their primary mission to secure the homeland, that if they don't want to show up for work, then maybe they're just not truly passionate about protecting America. I think they need to do that, and they need to recognize what their job is. The morale in DHS is very low. I'm going to let people do their jobs. I'm going to remind them what their jobs are. Some of these Border Patrol agents haven't been able to do their jobs for a very long time. They've been processing paperwork and facilitating an invasion when they should be back securing our border, which is why they were recruited and wanted to serve there to begin with. We're going to build partnerships with local law enforcement, with ICE and task forces. So we're communicating again with local sheriffs and mayors and law enforcement to partner together. When you talk about the fact that this is such a broken agency that needs so much improvement, a lot of it goes back to why we're recreated and are we fulfilling that mission and making sure that these individuals are getting back on task.
So under my chairmanship and under the Trump administration, we did rename a part of DHS, the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency. I in no way, shape, or form ever contemplated that the sub-agency within DHS that was really focused on securing us against the cyber threats and other threats to our infrastructure would ever be used to violate the Constitution the way it was used to violate the Constitution under the Biden administration. This administration has been completely opaque. We do not have the information to know and the communication in terms of what all happened here. So my question relates to how they misused CISA. Will you commit to providing the transparency, providing the information, investigate it yourself, but provide this committee, my subcommittee, the information to expose the truth to the American public, but even more importantly, propose a piece of legislation based on our investigation, based on those results, to fix it so that no administration can ever misuse the language of the law to commit that kind of unconstitutional act and violate people's First Amendment rights.
Yeah, Senator, I look forward to working with you on that. And I think what we saw during the COVID pandemic, the actions of CISA, their misinformation and disinformation campaign, the materials they were putting out was shocking. Shocking at what they were doing to decide what was truth, what wasn't, and how they were trying to manipulate the American people. We saw it in elections and Russia influence as well. And so ensuring that they can't do that in the future under any administration would be a priority, that they stay doing what they're supposed to do, and hardening our systems and working with local officials to do that is a priority. And I'd look forward to working with you on legislation should you wish to rein them in.
So the first step in that process is to expose the truth, to find out who these bad actors were, expose who they were, hold them accountable. I mean, that is crucial that we take that first step. So again, look forward to working with you on that. You know, the tragedy of the California fires, the more we learn, the more we understand that not only was it predictable, it was predicted, which means it was preventable. Again, you're not going to be, you can't prevent the initiation of those fires, but you certainly can prevent them from raging into the tragedy that they became, the dozens of people who've lost their lives, the hundreds of billions of dollars worth of property damage. It's not just California, though. I mean, again, that was grotesque mismanagement. That could have been prevented. You can't prevent a hurricane. You can't prevent floods. But you certainly can try and start reducing the moral hazard that we've allowed to explode, quite honestly, by the federal government rushing in immediately, no questions asked, just tell us how big a check you want. What can you do in your new role to try and start reducing over time the moral hazard that we have created in this country with federal disaster relief?
Well, Senator, emergencies and disasters are always locally led. They're led by the local communities and leaders, and that's because they're much more responsive and much better informed on how to bring relief and to get those emergency services there to meet the need. Then it's state supported and federally resourced. Which means that when we come in, that we're supporting what the mission is, what those emergency operations and plans are that the local city and county and then also the state has implemented and do what we can to fulfill the mission of our programs. One of the things that FEMA is not doing today that I think we should be doing is streamlining communications. We saw this in New Orleans. We saw it in other terrorist attacks in the country. And you just referenced it as well about the American people not getting the truth, senators not getting the truth and the transparency that we need, is that I believe FEMA can always put out a blueprint for what a response would be should something terrible happen. And when we look at the Secret Service, what happened in Butler, we saw that communication was an issue, that the Secret Service wasn't communicating and balls were getting dropped with local authorities, local law enforcement, and we can put forward a blueprint for how communication can happen and be streamlined between the federal government, the state, and the local entities, so that should something happen, this is how we talk to each other, to make sure that the public has the facts, they're not getting misinformation, which happened with the New Orleans terror attack just recently, but also up in Pennsylvania as well. That blueprint is what we do at the state level that FEMA has failed to do, to proactively educate the public on what everybody's roles are, what we do should something happen, whether it be a natural disaster or a terrorist attack or an emergency response is needed, that we can put out those blueprints ahead of time, educate people, train those local entities, which they currently do to a certain extent today, but not good enough to really know that not only can the resources be pre-deployed in many of these situations so that they're more readily accessible, but also how are we going to communicate and make sure everybody's on the same page so that we can be much more efficient. I wish that we would have had different leadership and a different governor in California, or we might have a different result there. But in the Department of Homeland Security, we can do all that we can to make sure that the people that live in California know that they're going to get a response from the federal government that's appropriate, and we did all that we could to make sure that they had the information ahead of time so they could protect themselves when they do have a failure in leadership like we've seen.
Well, thank you and good luck.
You bet.
Since Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're well aware, this budget does none of the things, virtually none of the things that Democrats are accusing you of doing in the markup. We're not slashing. There aren't draconian cuts. We're not giving things away to the ultra-wealthy. What we're hearing is the same old tax and spend rhetoric, the scare tactics that our colleagues on the other side have used for decades now to mortgage our children's future. What this budget is all about is starting to clean up, take the first steps in cleaning up the enormous messes left behind by the Biden administration and his allies, Democrat allies here in Congress. I want to talk about two of them. We're $36.4 trillion in debt. No family, if they were faced with a serious illness and had to borrow $50,000 to pay for medical bills, if that family member got well, would keep borrowing $50,000 and keep spending at that level. That is an insane approach. Nobody would do that. But that's exactly what the federal government has done. Let me take a look at the first chart. In 2019, the fiscal year before the pandemic, the federal government spent $4.4 trillion. Year of the pandemic, we had to do something fast and massive so markets wouldn't collapse, so we went on a massive spending spree, spent almost $6.6 trillion, 6.5. Now again, when the pandemic wound down, you would think we would return to some reasonable baseline spending level. We didn't do that. For the next 5 years, we averaged $6.5 trillion. Last year, we spent $6.9. The Wall Street Journal just reported the first 4 months, we spent $2.43 trillion. Multiply times 3, that's $7.3 trillion, 61% ahead above $4.4 trillion. Our population grew at 2.6. This is completely unjustified. No family, no business would do this. That's what the federal government has done. So the question is, how do we return to a reasonable pre-pandemic spending level? Now, I'm sure, I know Republicans do, maybe even Democrats too, talk about zero-based budgeting. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever return to that, but here's the next best thing. Over the Christmas break, I went back to look at other budgets that we could use as a baseline. Don't accept them all, but I mean, use them as a reasonable baseline. So I looked back in 1998, where we actually had a surplus of $69 billion under Bill Clinton. Now, if you take that $1.7 trillion of total outlays from 1998, increase it to account for population growth and inflation, use today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest payments. So you exempt those programs, but inflate Bill Clinton's total outlays, you'd end up spending $5.5 trillion this year. Now, what's interesting about that is President Biden is projecting $5.5 trillion of revenue. Using Bill Clinton's budget from 1998, his total outlays, by the way, that was supported by Senators Grassley, McConnell, Murray, Wyden, Durbin, Collins, Schumer, Graham, Thune, Wicker, Moran back in 1998. Very bipartisan budget. We'd have a balanced budget. Now, if that's too reasonable for you, I took a look at President Obama's 2014 budget. Again, used this year's Social Security, Medicare, and interest, but grew those total outlays by population growth and inflation. You'd end up with $6.2 trillion and about a $700 billion deficit. Again, too reasonable for you? Not reasonable enough? Go to 2019 actual spending. Grow that by population and inflation, you'd be at $6.5 trillion. No matter how you cut it, the worst case scenario, using those very reasonable baselines, you'd save $800 billion by basically spending what we did only 5 years ago. There's nothing draconian about that. It's called reasonable. Now, what Chairman Graham has done, he's taken a fourth option. I took a look at what President Trump budgeted in his last year in office for 2025. That was $5.5 trillion. That also would balance the budget, but that wouldn't account for Social Security and Medicare at today's level. So if you put those figures in there, you're $6.061 billion. That's the chairman's mark. Now, again, nobody's suggesting you use every line item in President Trump's budget. It's a top-line figure. Personally, I'd go back to the Clinton budget. Take a look at that. You have about $500 billion to plus up things like defense, veterans benefits. Again, there's all kinds of reasonable ways to approach this. We're just not approaching it reasonably. So again, we've got a pathway, a very reasonable way. We've got 4 different options here of how to return to a pre-pandemic level to clean up that mess, this massive amount of deficit spending and debt. But here's why we're really here today. Final chart. To clean up this mess. The open borders that President Biden used his presidential authority. You know, we kept hearing lies that we needed a bill. No, we didn't need a bill. President Trump used the presidential authority he had after his border crisis caused by DACA to secure the border before he left office. President Biden used that exact same presidential authority, open it wide up. Create a clear and present danger that now we're having to clean up that mess. And by the way, just to prove they had the presidential authority to close it back down, when it became a political liability in 2024, he started using that authority and he started closing the border. What President Trump is doing, he's closing it. But he needs help. He needs another $175 billion, and that is the main purpose of this markup. We're not slashing, we're not giving away tons of dollars to the wealthy. We're trying to clean up the mess of an open border that threatens every American. That's what we're trying to do here. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your dedication to also coming up with a reasonable spending level, pre-pandemic spending level, in our next round of this. So thank you much.
Senator Johnson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unlike our ranking member, I really appreciate you holding this hearing. In 2019, before the pandemic, total federal government spending was $4.4 trillion. The Wall Street Journal just reported the first 4 months of this year, we spent $2.43 trillion. Multiply that times 3, we're on a course of spending $7.3 trillion this year, 6 years later. That's a 61% increase while our population is growing 2.6%. So we need to scrutinize all this spending. Now, I thought it was interesting. I don't know how many boards you had up there, but the example after example after example of just outrageous waste and abuse of the taxpayer dollar. Now, the ranking member apparently accused you two gentlemen of you're going to be peddling conspiracy theories. That all was the truth. Do you have any idea what the ranking member is talking about, Mr. Schellenberger?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I find it somewhat ironic that one of the greatest conspiracy theories of recent times was the Russiagate collusion hoax, which was this idea that President Trump was being controlled by Putin through a sex blackmail operation. It was one of the most wild conspiracy theories ever devised, and of course, it was created by deep state operatives working on taxpayer funding. Another wild conspiracy theory, of course, Senator, was that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian disinformation effort. We now know that
which, by the way, the ranking member accused me when I was investigating that of soliciting, disseminating Russian disinformation on that. Wrote an actual Senate report, falsely accused me of that, but go on.
Right. And of course, now we know the FBI had the laptop in, I think, November or December 2019. They then got the Aspen Institute to engage in what's called pre-bunking or kind of brainwashing, convincing journalists and social media platforms that there would be a Russian hack and leak that fall involving Hunter Biden and Burisma. That's an illegal weaponization of the FBI, of a U.S. government contractor and grantee Aspen Institute. These things have not been fully investigated, but we know, thanks to the Twitter files, that this was the illegal weaponization of our government agencies in order to spread a conspiracy theory in service of demanding censorship, which is what they then did when the New York Post article came out in October.
I also have to point out that I was a target of that pre-bunking campaign when both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by the FBI that we are targets of Russian disinformation. To this day, we have not found out who directed that briefing. So, Mr. Ruger, do you want to defend yourself from being accused of a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a theorist. I'm an international relations theorist. I think what I said is definitely within the broad tradition of political realism that has served this country well, really focusing in on, I think, the importance of our strength and how we defend and deter against enemies. And really, I think, applying good economic analysis to aid programs and other government programs because they need to pass a cost-benefit analysis. Too often, I think, and especially given what we talked about with the $36 trillion in debt, we're not applying good trade-off decisions in terms of how we spend our money. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why it's really important that we focus in on this. And I applaud what President Trump is doing here because somebody has to get a handle on this. And I think it's a good stimulant for Congress to do its own work to help support the president in making sure we're protecting taxpayer money.
So we're a very compassionate people. We are. We want to help people. We want to help combat AIDS and feed the world. Where did USAID go off the rails? I mean, it was established, I think, good purpose. I mean, even things like, Radio Liberty, those types of efforts seem to make sense. But where did they go off the rails? Mr. Schellenberger, do you have a theory on that?
I mean, for me, it's this effort, the regime change effort that then resulted in this effort that really starts in around 2007, 2008. It's led by USAID. USAID creates and provides all of the initial funding. It was from the State Department originally.
Who was in charge back then?
Of USAID, I believe. Well, that was 2008. So President, I'm not sure.
So under the Bush administration,
it was under the Bush administration.
Started going off the rails. Mr. Ruger, do you have any idea? What's your theory of when the South started going south or going left?
Well, I mean, again, one question really at the beginning is how effective are these types of assistance programs, period? So you could argue that in some senses, this went off the rails from the very beginning because it opens the door to the idea that that there is potentially no limit to what could be effective for the United States if we spend that money abroad. But in fact, that isn't the case, right? There hasn't been the type of cost-benefit analysis that's needed here. So again, I think part of it is fundamental to a program where you're spending millions and billions of dollars across the globe in a way that is very difficult to achieve accountability, particularly if those within the bureaucracy are less subject to the kind of incentives that care about how this money is spent.
Thank you, Mr. Ruger. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vogt, Mr. Bishop, welcome back to the committee. I look forward to working with you closely in your important role. I didn't want to disappoint anybody, so I thought I'd bring at least one chart.
You have some famous charts, Senator. So
This is, again, not a surprise. You realize I've proposed a number of pre-pandemic levels of spending. They've all been prepared the exact same way. I've taken actual total outlays from 1998 under Clinton, 2014 under President Obama, and then 2019 under President Trump. I've exempted Social Security and Medicare. I've used 2025 numbers for those and interest. But all other spending, I've increased the total outlays by population growth and inflation. So these are three options ranging from 5.5 trillion up to 6.5 trillion. It's interesting if President Trump or President Biden projected revenue for 2025 at 5.5 trillion. If we'd use the Clinton baseline, we'd have a balanced budget. So it's within our grasp if we know how to do it. And that's what I want to really talk about. Yesterday at Senate lunch with Republicans, I just asked the question, did anybody, any of our colleagues think that in 2019 we spent too little? Nobody did. And anybody think it wouldn't be a reasonable control to take that spending level, increased by population and inflation, and put that as a baseline? Nobody disagreed. Then I pointed out this year we'll spend 7.3 trillion. That baseline is 6.5. That's an almost $1 trillion delta, $800 billion. So how do you get there? A couple dozen of us Republican senators met with Elon Musk last week. I thought was noteworthy is he's talking to me, we're not talking about 2 or 3 big items. We're talking about thousands and thousands of contracts. A few $1 million, just unbelievably wasteful and abusive of the taxpayer money or the borrowed money that's a mortgage on our children's future. President Trump had some great examples, some embarrassing, some outrageous examples last night. So I handed you a variance sheet, 17 pages, comparing that baseline to project 25 by function and subfunction. I've also got hundreds of pages of 5,000 to 6,000 line items of every outlay, again, plussed up for population growth and inflation, compared to about 2025 within the variance. And that's what I'm trying to get across to my colleagues who've never been in business, the way the private sector would do this, line by line, asking the manager to come and say, we never gave you the permission to increase your budget beyond, the number of people we're working with or inflation. Explain yourself. And then basically demand reduce spending to that control. How do we do this? Is that the right approach? Because what's happening in the House right now, they're starting at 7.3 trillion. They're looking at a couple big programs. They're getting it tacked. So they say, we can't cut that, can't cut that, can't cut that, as opposed to start from a baseline that everybody on our side thinks more than reasonable. I don't think we should be looking at anything over 6.5. I'd be starting at 5.5 and probably plussing up for defense. But isn't that the way we need to do this? Line by line, the way the private sector would approach outrageous overspending. Mr. Bishop.
Well, Senator, I would say a couple of things. I've heard you speak of this topic and lay this out in this very persuasive way in a number of different forums, as you know, public ones and private ones. And first, I would say I think the conversation, the point that you are making absolutely should be at the forefront of the discussion at all times. And I'm grateful to you for making it so. I have seen that. I think most Americans would wonder why the massive growth in the federal government spending at COVID, at that event, why would that be completely irreversible? Why would we now be on a permanent track at a higher percentage of GDP as expenditures in federal government than ever in the history of the country? It's untenable. And it is, and you can look at those numbers and you can see that the debt is already out of control and it's going in the wrong direction so fast it ought to frighten everyone. So your point's well taken. I would say also that, of course, in my role as deputy director, I spent a lot of time in Congress articulating my own views, but now I am working on behalf of the president to implement his policies, and there are a lot of things that are competing for attention. But I think that one, you make the greatest points of anyone, I think, in Congress about consistently focusing on this issue and making sure this point is in the conversation. And it certainly has an impact on me. I know it does on Director Vogt, and we'll continue to look forward to working with you to see how we can bring the logical conclusion to reality.
So, Mr. Chairman, one more point is, one thing, and we have to figure out, how do we implement the DOGE exposures? There may be room for empowerment, but in general, we're going to have to codify that, and it's going to be line by line. So again, I want to work with you and the administration to literally go line by line and build this thing up, as opposed to suffering death by 1,000 cuts, starting at a grotesquely unreasonable spending level of $7.3 trillion. So
I look forward to
working
joining
with
in
you.
the endeavor. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Merkley actually had that one right, I thought. Do a rescission bill. Senator Lee.
Senator Johnson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Bisignano, thank you for your willingness to serve. I have to compliment President Trump and his team. I can't imagine them finding a more qualified individual for this position. I mean, I'm not kidding. I think it's pretty remarkable. First of all, did President Trump or anybody on his team, in interviewing you and deciding to make this nomination, did any of them ever talk about cutting benefits for Social Security?
No, as a matter of fact, always talked about it's something we wouldn't do.
It's doing everything we can to protect
Yes,
Social Security, correct?
yes.
You mentioned in previous answer to the question here that the 1% error rate is too high. I want you to compare the IT systems, the processing, the payment processing that you've done at Fiserv and other companies to Social Security. Just give the committee some sense of your depth of experience in dealing with these things versus Social Security.
Well, we have 13,000 software engineers today at Fiserv. I like to believe we're fundamentally a tech company, that provides payments, 100% of the American households. A lot I've heard is about the old COBOL system at Social Security. I actually believe that's the system we have, and we know how to build around it.
By the way, you have that at Fiserv?
It's all over the world.
So you'll be able to adapt from that.
Yeah, it can be dealt with. It's not the problem. I think one of the things I'd say is there's no substitute for experience. I believe that, and I think I'm the first commissioner that's actually been a technologist, an operator, understands payments, has run call centers, has done settlements, understood how to deal in crises, whether it was 9/11 or whether it was 08 or the mortgage crisis. So I come with a depth of experience in how to make systems work for the people inside the agency and for our users.
So as you're aware, I'm an accountant, so I like numbers. I mean, do you have off the top of your head just the annual number of payments? For example, Fiserv makes to virtually every household in America versus Social Security?
We do 250 million payments a day for $2.5 trillion versus 74 million a month at Social Security.
So a lot more.
Yes, sir.
A lot more. So talk about that 1% error rate. What is the error rate within Fiserv?
I think you got to go. I think you think about it 5 decimal points to the right. I think about it 5 decimal points to the right. And we're always trying to strive to get that better. I think about answering the phone in less than a minute. We do it in 22 minutes right now at Social Security.
Again, I know you're not commissioner, so you don't necessarily have this answer. What do you think drives the much higher error rate in Social Security? I mean, is it the complexity of the tax code? Is it just inefficiency of the system? I mean, what?
I think it's that we accept it.
Pardon?
I think we've accepted it.
Oh, okay. So something you think you could, with your experience, you can fix?
Yes, sir.
I do want, I don't know that anybody else has done this. I hate to open up, the can of worms again, but do you have any idea what Senator Wyden and Senator Whitehouse were talking about in terms of these whistleblowers? And I mean, do you want to take an opportunity to just, address what allegations they were throwing your way?
I don't really. I don't know about the whistleblowers. I know that, I brought, Mike Russo sent me a note and he came in as the CIO. I know Mike Russo for a long time and, That's really kind of it.
So obviously, the folks on the other side of the aisle have a real problem in trying to make government more efficient and trying to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. Again, I'm a huge supporter of what Elon Musk and his doers group are doing. I don't understand why they're not, quite honestly. So again, I think somebody like Elon Musk, somebody like yourself, these are accomplished individuals that have a depth of experience, and they're asking questions of government that have never been asked before. Here in Congress, had we asked those, we don't give we're not given access to this information. So you have to be inside the administration to actually ask these questions, get the answers, but you have a response.
Well, I think, first of all, you know, it's a multidimensional issue. We need to deliver service, we need to deliver quality, we need to deliver control, and we need to deliver efficiency. And, you know, if you're battle tested, I believe I'm battle tested, you know how to do all of those. And I view DOGE as an input. You know, the president's been very clear, the agency heads are in charge of the agency.
Well, again, I can't imagine somebody more qualified for this position. So,
You're kind.
You know, again, you got my support, and again, thanks for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's the standard practice of this committee for the chairman to ask the nominees the following question. Do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed? Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Euland? I do. I'll reserve the remainder of my time, and at this time, recognize Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you gentlemen for your willingness to serve your nation in this aspect. Mr. Cooper, you're obviously from the private sector, and the private sector has certain disciplines. You know, they have to balance the budget, they go bankrupt, and then everybody loses their job. But also, in general, it should be at-will employment. The federal government doesn't have to balance its budget, which is why we're approaching $37 trillion in debt. And by and large, federal employees are immune from losing their job. So they don't show up for work, and they expect they can still continue to be employed. So you want to just quick address the imbalance there and how that impacts the effectiveness of the federal government?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Look, I agree a foundational part of any organization ultimately is accountability, as you're talking about. And that requires managers, obviously, to provide feedback and to protect individuals. But ultimately, I do think, you know, we should look to a system where if people are performing, quite frankly, they should be rewarded and rewarded handsomely. And if people are not performing appropriately, then we need to find ways in which for them to find opportunities elsewhere.
Mr. Euland, about 3 years ago, we were engaged in an omnibus spending debate, and I asked my colleagues, as well as the Washington Press Corps, anybody know how much we spent last year? Nobody answered. I did get one answer from the press. It was like over $1 trillion. Okay, that's discretionary spending, which is approximately 25% of total spending. The other 75% is mandatory, and we never look at it. We've gone from $4.4 trillion in 2019 to probably about $7.3 trillion this year. Completely out of control. 63% increase. Our population's growing 2.6%. I think you're well aware of the different pre-pandemic spending options I've laid on the table. What I want to talk about is a process for returning to a pre-pandemic level. We've never had a process to control federal spending. I wasn't aware of the fact that appropriation committees were initially established because of the authorizing committees were big spenders. Well, that didn't work. The Budget Act didn't work. Simpson-Bowles didn't work. The Budget Control Act did restrain discretionary spending for a couple of years, but we weaseled around that. So, you know, I proposed a bicameral panel, senators, House members working with OMB, to do something the private sector does all the time, a budget review meeting, and go through the 2,400 individual lines of expenditures and ask the administration to justify the spending. Compare that against, for example, fully inflated 2019 spending, or 2014 under Obama, or 1998 under Clinton. So again, you've got a lot of experience. You've seen to what extent the administration looks at the detail. We don't. Again, Congress doesn't even consider 75% of the budget, and I would argue the 25% we do is not done in a particularly professional manner. It's pretty much, well, what did we spend last year? we're going to increase it 2, 3, 4% and then pat ourselves on the back, I guess, when we don't increase it. Wow, by the way, we're sliding discretionary spending into other mandatory. We've gone from $642 billion in other mandatory, not Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid, $642 billion of other mandatory to $1.3 trillion this year. So again, with short time remaining, talk to me about how we can develop a process like the private sector to go line by line through the federal budget cooperatively, the administration with Congress, so that the end result is something we can all embrace.
I appreciate your question, Senator, and absolutely, we've discussed this before, and I know you've had a chance to discuss this both with the president and the director and the deputy director. As you know, OMB, under the director and deputy director, are going through this line-by-line evaluation against a rubric of the president's campaign commitments, but as well in working to engage with you and other members of the Senate and the House about where matters stand, potential alternatives, share information and ideas, ultimately, to your point, to ensure that to the maximum extent possible, we are as unified as possible on the budget path and trajectory going forward. To your point about the amount of money being spent, one of the challenges, as you know, that has oftentimes not been as easily noticed by the press is how much of that spending is obligatory interest payment on the federal debt, which is something, again, when you joined the Senate, was much lower, around $100 billion a year, and now is $1 trillion a year. It exceeds almost any other domestic discretionary aggregate big spends, including the Department of Defense and Labor and HHS. So we have a challenge for the $36 trillion of debt that we already owe, which isn't, by the way, as you know, better than most, not the full debt, just the public debt. The debt that we owe to ourselves, you add that on top, we're at nearly $45 trillion. And so being very methodical, very careful, very clear about where to go is something that I hope there is both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue's ability to engage and work through.
So I guess I'm just asking for a commitment to continue to work with us on developing a process that actually achieves a pre-pandemic level of spending. Will you do that?
Absolutely happy to commit to the process. And again, I know you've discussed directly with Director Vogt ideas about the best way to engage in that conversation.
Done. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peters.
Sorry.
Madam Secretary.
No need to be sorry, Madam Secretary.
Maybe.
Welcome. Thanks for your service. I think you've probably seen this chart.
Yes.
Why don't you bring it a little bit closer here? For the first time, I've brought this chart and it's showing good news. For the previous 4 years, it described a disaster, a catastrophe, a clear and present danger to this country. And one of the reasons I want to point it up here is to point out how we were lied to during that entire 4-year period by the administration, reinforced by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, saying we had to have Congress act. You know, we needed legislation.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, no, we just need a new president. We need President Trump. Now, I would have been happy to pass a bill to reinforce President Biden's authority to secure the border, but he didn't want to. I think what's clear about this chart is you can see when President Biden was considering re-election, he realized the catastrophe at hand was becoming politically unpopular, and so he used the executive authority that President Trump had used to secure the border in his first term, and he started actually making progress on that. So again, it's just important the American people understand that for 4 years, the Biden administration, reinforced by the folks on the other side of the aisle, lied, bold-face, that President Biden didn't have the authority to secure the border. He wanted an open border. That's exactly what he got. Now, the question I have for you off this chart is, in his first term, took President Trump about 12 months to go from his peak of almost 5,000 encounters per day to a little over 500. You know, remain in Mexico, the agreements he had with the third countries, that type of thing. How could he do it so swiftly this time? This is literally a matter of months. In February is 418 encounters per day on average. In March is 355. And this is stunning success. I just kind of want to get your reaction in terms of how he accomplished it, how you guys accomplished this.
You know, I would say, Senator, that the president used not only the laws that were already on the books and started enforcing them, he also made sure that he talked about it and messaged it. Throughout the campaign, he talked about the need for a secure border. What we need to remember constantly in this country is that the world listens to everything that we say and what our leaders say. And he told me specifically when he nominated me for this position, I don't want you just to go and run the Department of Homeland Security, secure the border, and make sure that our agencies are back on mission. I want you to tell the world what we're doing, because the only way they're going to stop coming to this country is if they know never to leave their home country. If they know that we're enforcing our laws, they will stop coming. And that's exactly what's happening. Because of our messaging, because of the fact that we have actively talked in Guatemala, in Honduras, in Mexico about don't come to the United States anymore illegally. There will be consequences. They have stayed there. In fact, we're showing now in the Darien Gap that it's reverse migration, that people that got to Mexico never even made it to the border. Now they're turning around and going back home. When I was in Mexico visiting with the president there and with government leaders, she said specifically they think there could be 500 to 600,000 people that just stopped in Mexico that turned around that were never even countered that reached our border. I think that's why in March you saw less than 200 encounters a day. And it was a historic low for this country in encounters. And it was because not only did he enforce the laws and show there would be consequences if you broke our laws, which is what our country was built on, he also made sure that we talked to the American people about why we were doing it, that it was for our safety and for our future, and that also to these other countries that it was no longer going to be the status quo of Joe Biden.
And of course, that's a sea change the Biden administration welcomed. I mean, they encouraged, they incentivized people to come here. So this is a budget hearing. I do want to ask. In the first Trump administration, I have best information. We built something like 458 miles of walls. Cost about $6.6 billion, about $14 million per mile. Your budgetary request right now is for $46.5 billion, a lot more. That would, at the same price, build something more than 3,000 miles. So can you kind of square that circle, or circle that square, whatever? Can you explain exactly what are you asking for in that $46.5 billion? Why is the request so high when we were able to build so many miles in the first term for a lot less?
Well, today the estimates are that building steel bollard wall will be over $12 million a mile, is what they're estimating. We have built about 70 miles of wall since the president has been in place, but that's been a mixture of permanent steel versus temporary versus a little bit of buoy barrier where it's appropriate that are waterborne.
So again, the 12 million is less than the 14 million I had calculated. That would be way more than 3,000 miles. Are you really planning on building 3,000 miles?
The problem that we have at the border right now is that we have CBP cameras and towers that don't work. We have some authorities there with the FAA on infrastructure that helps us do surveillance of areas where there isn't a wall that is not even operational. I would say 1 out of 3 actually are functioning today, which makes the individuals that are there work even harder. And we know that we talk about gotaways and what happens today. The truth is that there's portions of this border that we still don't necessarily know what happens there 24/7. So we need.
We're $37 trillion in debt. I'm just going to ask that you and the department sharpen your pencil on that wall request. I think it's more than you need. Okay. Again, I'm happy to provide the support you need to secure the border, do the deportations, but we need to be very concerned about how much we're spending, and it needs to all be justified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, excellent hearing. I think it's kind of notable when you have a hearing on how to improve outcomes and lower costs. Most Republicans show up. We have the ranking member here on the Democrat side. It's pretty interesting. We're looking ahead at how to do that, but I think in order to fix a problem, you have to really define what the problem is, and you have to look at the past. And I don't want to dwell too much on the past, but right now there's been a lot of talk about extending the enhanced temporary subsidies that were put in place to help people through the pandemic. So I have to talk a little bit about Obamacare. And Ms. Lambrou, you were part of the Obama administration after the passage, but leading up to the implementation of it, correct? So you were there when President Obama was out there saying that Obamacare would lower the average premium for a family by $2,500 a family, correct?
I was there when we talked about slowing the growth of healthcare, yes.
President Obama made that claim, right? $2,500 lower premium per family, correct?
Over time with slower growth.
Okay, that hasn't panned out, has it?
It has.
It has not.
We have
Premiums,
seen slower growth in the
inflation's
health
gone up
insurance
35%,
marketplace.
39% since 2013. I've seen, again, it's very difficult because you have a whole range of premiums, but just one benchmark premium's up to 118%. That's 3 times the rate of inflation. So no, that did not occur. Premiums have skyrocketed because of the faulty design of Obamacare. President Obama said you could keep your doctor, you could keep your health care plan. That was PolitiFact's 2013 lie of the year, correct?
Today, there is no lower percentage of people with employer-based coverage than there was
But people
before
lost
the
their
law
doctors. For example,
passed.
Obamacare outlawed high-risk pools, which worked beautifully in states. They worked beautifully in Wisconsin. As an employer, we use them all the time. It worked great. You outlawed those. You outlawed short-term plans. So again, that was PolitiFact's 2013 lie of the year. Let's just look at enrollment history. Obamacare impacted Medicaid expansion, okay, and there's problems with that, but let's focus just on the individual market. That was the other thing that Obamacare, again, fix all these, this marketplace for individuals. There are about 12 million people prior to Obamacare taking advantage of the individual markets. You completely disrupted that, got rid of high-risk pools, got rid of short-term policies. Before the pandemic, there were 14 million people on the Obamacare exchanges, so 2 million more people on these individual policies. Then all of a sudden, with the enhanced premiums, all of a sudden we're up to 24 million people. Now, are you aware of the problem we're having with the no premium policies, of phantom policies where you have unscrupulous agents and brokers signing people up without their knowledge? They get a commission. The premium tax credit goes directly to the insurance companies. We've seen estimates $20 to $30 billion per year of premiums going to the insurance companies on phantom policies. People make no claims on them. Are you aware of that?
I am aware that there are agents and brokers that have been falsely signing people up. Last year, action was taken. 500 of them were unsubscribed.
So we've gone from...
This year, the H.R. 1 did include many policies to address that. But the reality is that those people are the victims, and we are trying to make sure that we keep them covered when they want to sign up for
my point being,
coverage.
went from 12 million to 14 million, now up to 24. That's not 24 million real people.
The uninsured
there are
rate in the
millions
country,
that aren't
uninsured
even,
rate in this
that aren't
country
even
has
there.
dropped,
So
sir.
again, you're
Yes.
saying this is going to be a huge problem. Now, isn't it true that the original design of Obamacare, there were no subsidies for people making more than 400% of the poverty line, correct?
Yeah, there are currently 3 to 4
Just
times more
answer the
subsidy for
question. The
people with
original design of Obamacare, nobody working or making more than 400% above the poverty line got a subsidy, correct?
people who have employer-based coverage get a subsidy. People with Medicaid get a subsidy. People before the Affordable Care
on
Act
the
buying coverage on their own.
so
The retiree,
so the enhanced
the farmer
subsidies
could not get
the
help from
enhanced
the federal
subsidies
government.
the enhanced subsidies started providing subsidies for people above 400% poverty. Your chart here in page 6, this is talking about people higher out-of-pockets that didn't qualify for subsidies in the original Obamacare. The subsidies aren't going away when the enhanced premiums go away. The original design of Obamacare stays in place, correct? Correct?
We know that people have been significantly helped by the improvements that were made in 2020, and people will be hurt if they leave. Those were many pandemic policies, telehealth,
those were temporary enhanced,
tax credits,
those were temporary enhanced subsidies, and the Democrats in their law, they scheduled them to expire this year, right? Republicans had no point in that at all.
The 2017
part of that at all. That was designed by
tax cut
Democrats
bill
to
also
expire.
extended policies that ended that just got extended without being paid for. Tax
So again,
extenders happen all the time.
you are claiming harm to people that never qualified for the subsidy under the original Obamacare. Now you're also saying, because you're quoting people at the hospitals, if these enhanced subsidies expire, as they were meant to do by Democrats, it's going to be a calamity for the hospital industry. All that's happening is we're going back to the original Obamacare. So what you're saying is going back to the original design of Obamacare is going to be a calamity
Going
for
back to
hospitals?
1965 practices for medicine are also a calamity. I mean, we figured out something that worked. It should be extended. People have been helped by it. Costs have been growing slower than private employer-based coverage. Choices have gone up. Could it be improved? Without a doubt. But I think it is a fact that the uninsured went down, cost growth have not been excessive, we have more choices, deductibles have actually gone down. We really have seen in the last few years people able to choose deductibles that are now on average $400, not the higher amount. So I think the numbers show that the policy has met
My point is,
a number of goals.
My point is, if these enhanced subsidies expire, all that happens is we go back to the original design of Obamacare, which didn't work, didn't lower premiums, people couldn't keep their doctor, couldn't keep their health care plan. It's been a disaster, and the reason Democrats want to extend these subsidies, the reason we have subsidies is to mask the fact that Obamacare drove premiums sky high, and what this hearing is about is how can we bring those actual premiums down, deliver better outcomes, and we've got some great examples here. Doctor from Oklahoma is doing some marvelous things. It's called bringing consumerism, the free market principles back into healthcare. Republicans were interested in that. Democrats aren't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Hearing will come to order. Senators Ernst, Gallego, and Slotkin will participate in the hearing pursuant to Rule 8C of the Rules of Procedure of the Committee of Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. The ranking member and I approve of Senators Ernst, Gallego, Slotkin participating in today's hearing. I want to welcome and thank everybody for attending today's hearing titled Assessing the Damage Done by Obamacare. I want to especially thank the witnesses for the time and effort you put into coming here. I know we've got one of the witnesses took a red eye in. We ought to run a poll on the audience, see if you can identify who that person was. I'm not going to blow it. But again, thank you so much for your time and effort. Even before Obamacare was implemented, President Obama's repeated promise that if you like your doctor and health plan, you could keep them, was labeled PolitiFact's 2013 Lie of the Year. In a recent column, the Washington Post stated, quote, "The real problem is that the Affordable Care Act was never actually affordable." Today's witnesses will provide the gory details of exactly how unaffordable and damaging the signature legislation of President Obama and the Democrat Party has been. I've asked our three majority witnesses to each address a specific area where the damage has occurred. Our first witness, Joel White, will describe how further expansion of the third-party payer system under Obamacare has led to greater consolidation within all sectors of the healthcare industry, dramatically reducing competition and driving up costs. Our second witness, Taryn Bragdon, will describe the damage done to Medicaid and those who Medicaid was originally designed to help. Our third witness, Brian Blaze, will detail how the insurance market for individuals was dismantled and replaced by the Rube Goldberg Obamacare marketplace exchanges that, contrary to President Obama's promise of lowering family premiums by $2,500 a year, have caused premiums and deductibles to skyrocket. The witness for the minority, Shannon Verstegen, is a fellow Wisconsinite who I have a great deal of sympathy for. She is a victim of Obamacare's skyrocketing premiums and the limitations on small employers joining association plans, thereby forcing their employees onto the unaffordable exchanges. In Wisconsin, Obamacare exchange plans have increased 3.3 times the rate of inflation since 2013, whereas employer-sponsored insurance has risen at 1.6 times the rate. As a result, Ms. Verstegen's premium is more than $5,000 higher because of Obamacare. And if you compare it against inflation rate, that's about $7,500 higher than it probably should have been had we actually controlled costs with a health care plan. Today's hearing will highlight Obamacare's failure to meet its objectives. In March 2010, CBO scored, in the March 2010 CBO score used to pass Obamacare, it projected it would reduce deficits by $143 billion over 10 years and reduce the number of uninsured by 32 million by 2019. In 2013, the year before Obamacare implementation, 55 million Americans were enrolled in Medicaid. By 2019, that figure had increased by 17 million to 72 million, with Medicaid expansion accounting for 19 million of that total. That means enrollment in traditional Medicaid actually decreased by 2 million individuals over that time period. I know it's a lot of numbers. There's more to come. There were 12 million people enrolled in the individual market in 2013 and 14 million enrolled in Obamacare marketplace exchanges in 2019 for a net gain of 2 million. So you add that 2 million to the 17 million added to Medicaid, and the net reduction of uninsured due to the implementation of Obamacare was 19 million by 2019, only 59% of the 32 million originally projected by CBO. So first lesson there is kind of ignore CBO scores. They're not that accurate. Comparing 2025 to 2013, there are now 22 million more people enrolled in Medicaid and 12 million more enrolled on the individual exchanges, indicating a 34 million increase in enrollment. But wait, what is unknown, however, is how many illegal immigrants are included in the enrollment figures and how many phantom policies have been written for people who don't know they were enrolled and as a result make no claims. One estimate for 2023 puts the number of non-citizens enrolled in Medicaid alone at roughly 4.6 million. Addressing phantom policies on the exchanges, Brian Blaze will testify that in, quote, in 2025, improper enrollment in fully subsidized plans reached 6.4 million people, with associated improper federal spending exceeding $27 billion. So that's 11 million of the 34 million that should not be enrolled or maybe don't even exist. Obamacare is spread over multiple programs and agencies that have failed to adequately segregate its differentiated costs. So it's impossible to compare its actual impact on federal deficits versus CBO's March 2010 score. But I doubt many would argue that Obamacare actually reduced the deficit. We can, however, look at various spending components to get some sense of how it failed fiscally. Now, these two charts, and I'll just describe them. What we have is state-by-state comparison to 2013 premiums versus 2026. And you're seeing the percent increase. The red line shows the 39% increase in the CPI. So inflation went up 39%, but you can see on the individual exchanges, the average number of all those state increases was 169%. 4.3 times the rate of inflation. Compare that to employer-sponsored plans, which weren't affected as much by Obamacare, but there's also no reason that they should have increased at 1.9 times the rate of inflation. I mean, there's no reason for healthcare costs to be running this much higher than inflation, but again, you can see the exchanges are far worse than the inflation or the premium increases in the employer-sponsored plans. You can take those down. Federal spending on Medicaid has skyrocketed from $265 billion in fiscal year 2013 to $669 billion projected for fiscal year 2025. The cost of subsidies on the individual exchanges is projected to be $129 billion for fiscal year 2025, with the cost of the temporary pandemic-enhanced subsidies accounting for $20 billion of that total. The federal government takeover of the student loan program was supposed to help pay for Obamacare by reducing the deficit by $19 billion. Instead, there's been an additional $620 billion spent on debt cancellations and Biden administration's income-driven repayments. So instead of saving $19 billion, we spent $620 billion taking over student loans. Now, unfortunately, instead of acknowledging all the damage done by the faulty design of Obamacare and working in good faith with Republicans to repair it, Democrats simply want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars more in their attempt to continue to hide its failure. Extending the enhanced subsidies, the temporary subsidies Democrats designed to expire this year, not Republicans, Democrats set these to expire this year, would cost $350 billion over 10 years, plus an additional $60 billion in debt servicing costs. Lowering the health care costs and providing more American citizens with affordable insurance and covering individuals with pre-existing conditions are goals we all share. Unfortunately, Obamacare failed miserably at lowering costs and meeting enrollment goals. Accomplishing those goals could have been done by understanding and relying upon the benefits of consumerism and free market competition. By relying on those principles and returning to free choice for Americans, we can repair the damage done by Obamacare and transition to a health care system that actually works. With that, I'll turn it over to our ranking member, Senator Blumenthal. I'll start with questioning. You know, I purchased health care in Wisconsin for my smaller business for about 30 years. And just quite a few years before we even got over 100 employees. So I'm very familiar with the small employer market. We actually had, for 1 year, when one of the companies was really trying to buy share, where we had $0 deductibles. I mean, literally, everything was covered. There was no deductibles. There was nothing. I think next year they raised premiums 40%. We had to, switch over. But we were talking about $100 deductible per person with out-of-pocket maximum of a couple thousand. I think when I left in 2010, the most I ever remember was a couple deductibles, $2,500 per person with an out-of-pocket maximum about $5,000. Again, it's off the top of my head, but again, nothing like you're describing right now. So I would like to, and again, appreciate you working with our staff trying to fill in the details here, but I'd just like to kind of get a feel for, what your current situation is and kind of where you've been in terms of healthcare. So going back to 2013, I'm showing you the rate of increase since the implementation of Obamacare. What kind of insurance did you have in 2013?
Yeah, in 2013, our gym was a bit larger. It's a racquetball gym, so I don't know if any of you play racquetball. You probably don't know many who do. Therefore, it has gotten to be much smaller. And back in 2013, we did have employee-sponsored healthcare at that time.
Okay, so you had employer-sponsored?
Yeah.
Did you contribute anything to it?
I did, and it was actually really...
I don't expect you to remember. Do you remember approximately?
No, I sure can, and I remember this because my husband and I weren't married yet. And because I was a female of childbearing age, I paid almost $600 a month.
Okay.
And he had to pay under $200 a month, and we found that really unfair. So it was actually, even though it was employee-sponsored, still quite unaffordable.
So then 2014, 2015, you're also on employer-sponsored care, correct? Is it
Yes.
was the same one, similar
Yes.
types of rates?
Yes.
So again, you were paying about $600 a month.
Yes. Okay. I can't give you, I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers on me.
So in 2016, your employer no longer covered employees, so you end up having to get your insurance through the Obamacare exchanges. Next thing I have is in 2019, you were paying $1,000 a month for a silver plan.
In 2019, I don't know if it was a silver plan. I know it was a higher tier plan that we have
That's what
right now.
when you were looking.
Yes. So
Okay.
I chose a higher plan, and it was about $1,000 a month.
Do you remember what the deductible was? And by the way, do you have deductibles and then an out-of-pocket maximum? Is that how that works on your
Yeah,
exchange?
this year I don't have deductibles. I have fairly high copays and an out-of-pocket maximum. I do not remember what my deductibles were in that year that I was paying about $1,000, but I know they were significantly less than they are now. We have a lower tiered plan now.
Because now you say you switched to a bronze plan, and that was $250 a month. But you said I'm assuming you're assuming it's out-of-pocket maximum of $14,000, or is that just a deductible of $14,000?
The $14,000, I believe, is an out-of-pocket maximum. It's not $250 a month. It's $460 a month.
No, in 2021.
2021.
That is $250 a month.
Okay, yeah.
So now.
Yes, when we dropped to that lower tiered plan, yes.
And you were getting subsidies back then?
I don't believe so.
Back in 2021, you weren't qualifying for subsidies?
I can't recall.
Okay, I would think paying $250 a month, you probably were. Can we put up this next chart? And I've got this sheet in front of you. I've tried to cobble together what I think is representative of the kind of plan you're on. I'm not saying that this is yours, but this would be somewhat similar. This is a bronze plan. So for 2025, you're saying that your net premium is $460, and I know in your House testimony you said you had a subsidy of $800, so your gross premium was $1,260 a month. So on an annualized basis, that's $15,000 gross premium. You got a $9,600 subsidy, and you paid $5,500. Okay. Now, in Wisconsin, we're not the national average 26% increase this year. We just read this about 17%, but I did this based on 26. So assuming the national average gross premium increase, your total annual premium is going to go from 15,000 to about 19,000. Is that about what you're seeing in your? It's probably a little less than that because what I heard in Wisconsin, our average is about 17.
A little less than that, yeah.
Okay, but somewhere around $18,000, $19,000.
Yeah.
You're saying you're going to now be paying $700 a month. So that translates to $8,400 annually, correct?
Yes.
Times 12?
Yes.
So that means you'll be getting a subsidy still of about $10,600, roughly, about $10,000 subsidy.
Now my subsidy is
If your premium's
$420.
$18,000, $19,000, you're paying $8,400, you're going to get about a $10,000 subsidy, even with the enhanced subsidies going away, the temporary subsidies, when they expire.
Yeah, the enhanced was much more than that. Right now, it would go down to 400.
Okay, the last column is, what I did is I deflated the 19,000 back to 2013. And that gives us about $8,500 is what your premium, a similar type of plan's premium would have been before the ACA. Then if I reinflate it, based on employer-sponsored insurance, going up about 64%, your premium should be no more than, should be less than $14,000. That's a $5,000 difference. Now, if you inflate it just based on inflation, 39%, you'd be saving about $7,500 in premium. So again, I'm just laying this out. This is what's happening. So there's no reason for a plan like yours to cost $19,000 a year. But even with the temporary subsidies that, again, we're not the ones that set those to expire. That's what the Democrats did. Even with those subsidies expiring, again, you'll still be getting $10,000 to $11,000 subsidy. The problem is the premium, the gross premium, and that is being, we'll talk about this later with our other witnesses, that's Obamacare's faulty design. The fact that it forced all of the individuals like you in these individual policies to bear the full cost of covering people with pre-existing conditions. Prior to Obamacare in Wisconsin, we had something called a high-risk pool. It worked great. Now, it wasn't perfect. You could have tweaked it to make sure that everybody with pre-existing conditions were covered, but Obamacare did away with those and put that full cost of covering people, pre-existing conditions, on the backs of people like you. That's why health care primarily is so expensive on the individual exchange. There's many other reasons, but we'll get that into witnesses.
Is this can I answer?
Sure.
I know it wasn't exactly a question, but again, I'm not here to speak on, I'm clearly not an expert on why the co-pays and why the premiums and everything are rising. But I do know that the Affordable Care Act is the only option for coverage for my family. It's the only option for coverage for Huntington's disease families, for entrepreneurs. And I would really hope that lawmakers would work together to help rein in this corporate spending to help bring that down. And quite honestly, yes, the premiums are going up, but so is my gas, so is my electricity, so are my grocery prices. And I don't feel like the answer to this is to increase our premiums more. I know you said this is Democrat sponsored, but Republicans and everybody have the power to pass this extended premium tax credit so our bills don't go up even more. I'm not here to fix this today, but please help us for 2026.
The reason this is your only option is because Obamacare made it your only option. The reason you can't afford it is because Obamacare made premiums skyrocket. So again, it doesn't make any sense to throw hundreds of billions of dollars to hide and mask the faulty design of Obamacare. I am happy. I would be more than willing to sit down in good faith to work with Democrats to repair the damage done by Obamacare and transition to a system that actually keeps costs down. But again, when you've gone from an insurance policy that was probably about somewhere around $8,000 before Obamacare to now it's $19,000, four times more the rate of inflation. Yeah, everything's up, but everything's up 39%. Obamacare rates are up, what did I say, 169%? I forgot the exact figure. Again, it's the faulty design. With that, I'll turn it over
Respectfully,
to
Senator, if I had tested positive for Huntington's disease, what would my option have been then?
Again,
I wouldn't have had an option.
So what we would have done is high-risk pools. We would have had guaranteed issue within those. The cost would have been spread over everybody. That's the way it was originally.
My friends who tested positive were not able to afford
had a small percentage onto their insurance, and it paid for the high-risk pools. It worked marvelously, but Obamacare outlawed that. But anyway, Senator Blumenthal.
Problems, but forcing Americans who rely on the ACA to pay more, especially in this economy, will not help. And the American people said loud and clear on Tuesday that affordability is front and center on their minds. The affordability of rent and food and electricity and, yes, health care and health care coverage. Millions of Americans have no other option than the ACA, and they can obtain coverage only through the ACA. One of them is Sarah Colon. She lives in Clearwater, Florida, and I want to tell you a little bit about her story. We're going to play a video.
You are running out of time. How much longer is this going to go?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that...
My name is Sarah Colon. I live in Clearwater, Florida with my husband. We have a blended family of 6 kids. Our oldest is 24 and expecting a baby this month. The other 5 children live with us. Jordan, our second oldest, has muscular dystrophy and is permanently physically disabled in a wheelchair. Our other 2 college-age kids are in college, and our youngest are 9 and 11, and these 4 are all on our health insurance. We have health insurance through the healthcare marketplace. We got it a couple of years ago when my husband was no longer eligible for health insurance through his employer due to needing to take a little bit of extra time to take care of Jordan, who's in a wheelchair and needs extra help. The marketplace was really the only option for us. For middle-class Americans who don't have private health insurance through their employer and don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, there isn't another option. So we did apply through the marketplace and we got health insurance. It's not cheap. The only thing that makes it even remotely possible is the tax credits that we get that help defray some of the cost of the insurance. We found out this month that our health insurance costs are going to skyrocket to about $3,700 a month without these tax credits. And that's just completely impossible for our family to afford. Our house flooded last year during Hurricane Helene. We had to evacuate Jordan in a canoe. We just got back in our house in March, and we've just got through a tremendous amount of renovations, a huge expense, and we're not really in a position where we can move because our house is set up for Jordan. We have a handicap accessible bathroom, we have widened doorways. His wheelchair can get around and it wouldn't be able to in another place. Between home insurance and flood insurance and healthcare, we would be looking at paying about half of our income just toward insurance. And this is completely unrealistic for a middle-class American family. My husband and I are hard workers. My husband voted for President Trump. We just want to have affordable healthcare for our family. It's really scary to think about dropping health care when you have 2 young kids. The little things that happen, they get broken bones, sprains, things like that. And my husband and I want to have access to routine health care to make sure that we don't miss any healthcare issues as we get older in our 40s and 50s.
If you want to cut me off, you can.
I'm cutting you off right now.
But you cannot muzzle
I'm cutting you off right now.
a ranking member
I'm cutting you
under
off right
these
now.
rules.
I'm cutting you off right now.
You are stopping an opening statement just because you don't want to hear the facts. I think that's really regrettable.
You can continue your opening statement.
Fortunately, my Republican colleagues, I think, are willing to listen.
You can continue your opening statement, but let me make a...
So let me just conclude by saying
or you are going to
that right
conclude.
now,
That's good to hear.
Millions of Americans are wondering what is happening in Washington, D.C. And watching this hearing where the chairman is trying to muzzle a ranking member who's simply calling attention to the facts surrounding the ACA and the real-life stories of people like Sarah and Shayna Verstegen from Wisconsin indicates to me that we need to shine a light on what this effort is to repeal the ACA, and we need to stand strong in favor of affordable health insurance in the United States. Thank you to all of the people who have come forward, contacted me, who are here today to bear witness and be advocates in favor of affordable health care for people in the United States. I have more that I am going to say, but just let's be clear, assessing the damage done by Obamacare, the name of this hearing, gives away the game plan. Republicans are refusing to extend enhanced tax credits because they hate the ACA more than they care about the pain that this move will inflict on families. Thank you.
So the ranking member has been incredibly disrespectful of these hearings. This is the fourth example of this. The rules allow for one witness from the minority unless they request an extra. And I've granted that request in the past. I had no idea that he was going to add another witness via video. After, I didn't really time it, but 8-9 minute opening statement, then adding another witness that he could have asked ahead of time. I probably would have granted the permission. He didn't do so. He probably had 3 or 4 more pages of his opening statement. He was going to filibuster for about 30 minutes. So that's what's happening here.
Well,
I just wanted to.
I wish I had a half an hour more, but there's no way that I.
Again, you are just being rude. As you've been rude as ranking member since I took over the chair. It's unfortunate, but I'd appreciate if you'd stop being rude, follow the norms of this committee, and if you want an extra witness, request it beforehand. And please keep your opening statements to a reasonable length of time. I certainly extend that courtesy by keeping my comments reasonably short. I would like if the ranking member would do the same thing. It's unfortunate. But now we'll go ahead and swear in our witnesses if you all stand.